Cool, I think we are online now. So hello everyone. Welcome to another of my webinars about psychedelic science and culture. And today we'll be talking about the shadow of mainstreaming psychedelics. And before we dig in, I want to welcome my special guests, Dr. Labate from Chacruna, Alexander Beiner from Rebel Wisdom, Don D. Davis, straight from Idaho, and my Margolies from the Psychedelic Seminars. So hello, everyone. And I think it would be lovely to start with a little introduction. So if you tell me a bit about yourself and why you're interested in this particular topic. And to make it easier, I'll go clockwise on my screen. So Alex.
Thank you, Anya. Yeah, so I've been, I guess, involved in the psychedelic community I guess for all of my adult life. I had my first psychedelic experience when I was 18, and it really, I think, yeah, changed the trajectory of my life. And I wrote a novel about psychedelic culture and shamanism when I was 23, and like super charged up and excited about the movement. And then I had a podcast about visionary art, and so I was involved in a lot of the early internet forums, and very, very influenced by people like Terence McKenna, and very influenced by kind of the psychedelic counterculture, I suppose. And now I'm one of the directors of Breaking Convention, which I imagine some people know. We have a conference every 2 years in Greenwich University usually. And my wife, Ashley, is a psychedelic researcher and worked on the Imperial trial that finished recently. So I've been really, it's been a big part of my life. I've been very close to it. And now with Rebel Wisdom, we've done a psychedelic series, and currently I'm working on a film about this very topic, the mainstreaming of psychedelics, people's hopes and really their concerns, as well as we see this huge shift. And I'm sure all of us here have seen this very quick shift over the last 10, 15 years from being very fringe to now being mainstream in what for me is really like an astonishingly short time. So I care deeply about protecting the sacred, the way I see it, and so it's very close to my heart.
Oh, sorry. Thank you so much. And next one, Mike, please.
Hello. Thanks for having me. So yeah, Mike Margolies. I'm probably most known for my project Psychedelic Seminars. Like Anya here, and Bia as well, producing events featuring various speakers in the psychedelic scene. It was live events once upon a time, and now primarily online. Kind of behind the scenes, though, a lot of my work is also around the community building and network building. So I help other groups like this, like the Psychedelic Society, actually, other psychedelic societies in other cities around the world to form and help to connect them to each other. So a lot of, arguably, maybe I would say the more important piece of my work is the community and network building. But then also, of course, the public psychedelic education is also really important too. That's me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for being here. And next guest that will introduce herself is Bia. Muted.
Hello, everybody from San Francisco, Ohlone territory. Hello, Anya. My deepest happiness to be here with this kick-ass organization. I think the UK Psychedelic Society is maybe the most organized, self-sustainable organization in the space. We want to be like you guys when we grow up, and I'm so happy to be here and this, virtual, cross-cultural, global community in these harsh times. I am also super angry and pissed off about this whole mainstreaming thing, but I'll try to keep it discreet. I think we're just all really in shock with what is going on, those of us who have been around the block for a while, and I'm happy to be here. I am an anthropologist. I have a PhD in anthropology. The focus of my research has been shamanism, ritual religion, sacred plants, ceremonial uses, and also the interface between tradition, indigenous people, ceremonial uses, and the globalization of this plant medicines and this kind of hybrid cosmopolitan mixed scene that emerged. Also studied drug policy, produced a lot of different books about interdisciplinary aspects, and have organized different conferences and published different articles. More recently, we launched the Chikrina Institute for Psychedelic Plant Medicines, and we're also trying to publish critical thinking and raise awareness about all of these issues. I think perhaps we hosted one of the first panels in 2018 on the conference Cultural and Political Perspectives on Psychedelic Science, talking about the commodification of psychedelics. And just as a little appetizer to what's to come next, it's just amazing, mind-blowing that I think August 2018, less than 2.5 years from now, it's just totally different. At that time, that was something curious and kind of unique and kind of, a first conversation. We also published that open science statement by the Council for Spiritual Practices and Bob Jesse. And look what we are now. Less than 3 years later, it's so much going on. And we're still needing to catch up. So conversations like this one are most welcome. Thank you again. And also just my deep respect for my colleagues, all of them, except Alex that I don't know so much, but if he's married to Ashley, that's a good CV enough. And Don is an amazing friend and colleague for so many years. Thank you, Don, for your patience, for being here. I know you've been through a lot with the psychedelic community, and I'm happy that you still have patience for us.
Thank you, Bia, and thank you for being here. It was my dream to have you here for a few months, and finally we're here. And Dawn, do you mind introducing yourself, please? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see all your faces and to be here with all of you. I appreciate the invite by Anya. So just really brief, my name is Dondi Davis. I am a Nuwa. I am a member of the Shoshone-Bannock tribes here in Southeast Idaho, and the oldest unknown city in Idaho called Fort Hall. I am a mother. I am a wife. I am also a PhD candidate. And my research is focused on the conservation and perpetuation of the peyote cactus throughout its native range. I'm currently looking at using GIS to model what that habitat looks like. It's also including, some ethnographic interviews with landowners, with other Native American church members. And it's also looking at some of the environmental and anthropogenic impacts that occur within its habitat. So I appreciate being a part of this panel today because I think that, some of the issues that are surrounding the mainstreaming of psychedelics is all of those things that we're not talking about, which are anthropogenic and environmental impacts, and also how these impacts are detrimental and could negatively impact indigenous communities like the Native American people of the United States and the indigenous peoples of Mexico. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Dawn. I really appreciate you being here. I think this subject in the UK is not as known yet, so I'm really happy that you can bring this to light to our wonderful people who follow society and came here to this event today. And so just before we begin, the last thing is an announcement. We're going to have half an hour Q&As at the end. There's a Q&A option at the bottom of the screen, so feel free to type your questions there. Please do not post your questions on chat because it's very hard to manage. So we're only using Q&A option at the bottom. And you are able to upvote the questions. So have a look what you like, vote it up, because we might not have time to address everything because we only have 2 hours. Well, yes, a bit less now. And just to briefly kind of, for those that are not actually aware what mainstreaming is, because it's, well, you can't just go to the dictionary and find mainstreaming psychedelics in the dictionary. So let's just look what happened recently. We had, after all those years of suppression, political suppression, now we're in this midst of a worldwide psychedelic renaissance. And this is goal often pronounced by Rick Doblin from MAPS. Basically, at this stage, we have all top neuroscience universities doing psychedelic research. UCL, UCLA, Oxford, Imperial College, you name it, and they're probably doing something. Then we have all those massive donations and investments. You have Atai Life Sciences investing $25 million. You have venture capitalists, you have Dr. Bronner, you have Tim Ferriss, all raising money for psychedelic research. And you have MAPS raised $30 million in not-for-profit donations in less than 6 months. So there's all this money being funneled into this research. And media super enthusiastic recently, all about biomedical research. There's no psychedelic horror stories like back in the 60s and 70s. People actually are waking up to the therapeutic value. Society is starting accepting. Michael Pollan's book is everywhere. You can even buy it in Saudi Arabia, which is like, this says something. And even celebrities, Gwyneth Paltrow jumps on the wagon, and everyone basically seems to be a lot of psychedelic experts around. And we have the criminalization growing, the movement is growing. More and more American cities are decriminalizing. And you have all those new psychedelic startups, conferences, and loads of new people entering the field. They're like companies specializing in synthetic manufacture of medicine. You know, you have pharmaceutical companies and biotechnology companies, all getting into the field now. And my favorite quote from Chakruna article is that for some it's an ultimate goal, and for others, ultimate nightmare. And today we will explore some of those very difficult questions around both benefits and risks of mainstreaming. And we'll try to examine how we can make psychedelics accessible while facing against these oppressive and racist and systemic issues of capitalism that we are experiencing at the moment. And last thing, acknowledgement, is that pretty much we don't have anyone here from the other side. We don't have anyone here who is a big fan of mainstreaming psychedelics. That's why we decided we're going to look at the arguments that are commonly presented, and we'll try to unpick them. And I think this would be a best first point for this discussion is to look at those arguments. And the first one, which is I think the most common, is the Trojan horse, that we just have to get into the system, that the delivery of the medicine is important, but not the motives of the deliverer. And we just get them there and then the world will change. So I invite anyone who wants to take this one.
Yeah, I certainly have plenty to say on this subject. And I also want to clarify too about at least my own positionality in relation to mainstreaming psychedelics. Obviously, and perhaps my other panelists agree here, we want people to have access to psychedelics. We want there to not be a drug war. We want psychedelic healing to be available to people. But I think the thing that makes me at least feel pretty icky is when we talk about mainstreaming, it's the idea of now pushing psychedelics onto people. The idea of driving down, I'm here in Oakland. If I drive down to San Francisco on the Bay Bridge, there's billboards all the time for cannabis, right? I don't want to see like billboards pushing psilocybin onto people in 5 years. Are you feeling anxious, depressed? Or do you have addiction? Have you tried psilocybin? Like that's the kind of, and like the trying to, extractive profiteering off of psychedelics. These are the aspects of mainstreaming that are make me feel like access, yes, but kind of these other aspects are where it feels weird. And these, I think you're going to get more into these ideas of scaling and all this stuff. And and this idea of the Trojan horse argument that like we need to spread the psychedelics everywhere, because if more people are doing psychedelics, that's even though the system has all these problems, once you get the psychedelics into the system, it's going to transform it from the inside. So all we need to do is just get enough people MDMA and psilocybin, and that's going to help us with our trauma and our depression. And there's so many, I would say, flaws to that argument. One of them being that what's better than trying to fix trauma is not causing it in the first place. So to the extent that we are simply just using psychedelics as these silver bullet kind of thing that we think it's going to fix these problems, it's kind of missing the point. It's treating a symptom versus treating a root cause. And as we kind of talked about in some of our prep calls, Stan Groff describes psychedelics as non-specific amplifiers, which we usually think about on the individual level. And that's where the idea of set and setting comes from, right? Depending on your set and setting, psychedelics are going to give you a different experience. You're going to have so if you're in an environment where you're not safe, you're not comfortable, set and setting there, it's going to produce potentially a difficult experience. Whereas if you're in a setting that's supportive, that's designed for you to go into those shadow places, you can learn from that, right? But set and setting is really important, and it applies not only on the individual level, but also on the cultural level. So on the cultural level, if we're going to just think that we can give a lot of psychedelics to people and that's going to fix things, well, no, it's not necessarily going to fix them, it's going to amplify them. So all of the problems of the culture are not going to be fixed, they're going to be amplified. Now that can be a healing process if we're doing it consciously. If we see what's amplified, we're paying attention to it, and then we use that as the data to figure out what do we need to adjust to integrate the lessons. But to the extent that we're just going to try to spread psychedelics and think that, just by virtue of them existing, that's going to heal the things on their own. Well, no, it's probably going to make all of the problems of the culture worse, and we're already seeing that. All the problems that we see in extractive capitalism in the broader world, they are showing up amplified in the psychedelic. It's even more icky when you think about a profit motivated incentive of a company giving someone psychedelics to try to profit off it. It's even ickier, and we will call it Pala. If you haven't read that, I would highly recommend it, as really illustrates this. But I'll let some other folks comment. That's one response.
Thanks, Mike. I agree so much. Like we say, those problems are amplified. We see this pretty much happening with all the psychedelic narcissism that is actually like psychedelic narcissism is definitely much bigger problem than normal narcissists to me. All this spirituality and this striving to be perfect and to be happy and feel joy all the time, and all this loads of spirit bypassing and that. We often speak with Ali about this. I don't know if you have any comments to add.
Yeah, quite a few. I mean, it's I think Mike made some really good points, and it is a massive topic. I mean, what comes up for me when you talk about the bypassing side, I mean, it's important to know that we all bypass to some level. Spiritual bypassing has become kind of a buzzword, but it's something that happens. But where it happens a lot, I've noticed in the psychedelic world, is that there is this sort of golden period where you first have a psychedelic experience where this kind of great expansion happens. And with that great expansion, there's a lot of, everything is super salient and relevant and everything seems possible. And that energy is what I see coming up with a lot of venture capitalists, a lot of people who are new to the space, who have ostensibly, they have reasons that seem to be on compassionate grounds and may well be. But the problem is that there is a kind of bypassing of the dark side and the bypassing of the realism of, for example, what Mike was mentioning. You cannot, in my opinion, unpick the psychedelic experience from the narrative that's told around it. And this is something that I learned, or was made more aware of, by Eric Davis, who I was speaking to recently. Like, if we have a narrative of psychedelics that they're for health and well-being, and therefore healing trauma, and therefore healing X, Y, or Z, that has a huge impact on the way that culture then expresses and treats these substances and these medicines. And so if that's the narrative, then that scenario that Mike was pointing out of billboards being like feeling depressed, feeling anxious, psilocybin, that could well happen. That really could happen. And not just that, but then also the kind of breaking down of the molecules into patentable things. And this is actually, there's an author called Norman Spinrad, who was writing sci-fi in the 60s and 70s. And he pointed this out back then. He had all these kind of short sci-fi stories, which were these kind of semi-dystopian stories about scientists in a lab whose job was to find new psychedelic compounds that would just, you know, make you feel a little bit more like this, or treat this just a little bit better. And I think it's very realistic, based on how our society works, that could be the kind of future we're walking into, if we don't do so carefully. So yeah, I'll leave it there and let Dawn and Bia add to that.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I'm seeing in the mainstreaming of psychedelics is that we're willing to do all of this, but you know, we've got the cost of loss that we need to consider as well. And so I'm thinking about like the plants. I'm thinking about all of these plants, you know. I know that with psilocybin, it takes about 3 months. You know, the best case scenario to grow mushrooms would be 3 months before it's harvestable. I'm learning that it takes about 7 years to harvest some of the root from iboga. San Pedro could take possibly up to a year. And with peyote, it could take between 5 to 10 years, sometimes between 10 and 20 years. And so when we're looking at the mainstream of psychedelics, and we're looking at it from the perspective of the human need, what are we as humans doing about the need of these plants? Are we considering the needs of these plants? Because we seem to be okay with having all of this access, but what happens when we don't have these plants anymore? What are people going to do at that point? Or what are people going to do now to try and ensure that these plants are going to be accessible, not just for us, but that these plants can live for the plants themselves?
Thank you. And this is obviously the big worry with the ongoing decriminalization movement in states, right? And more it's popular, more it's pushed to people, people will want to try it. And I think the education about peyote, we will talk about this a bit more in detail, but the education about peyote is on extinction. It's not actually that, you know, spread around that much. As I said, not much in UK. So yes, thank you. We'll get into this soon anyways. And Bia, do you have anything to add to this like Trojan horse argument? What is your biggest beef with this? Muted?
Sorry, I agree with what all the colleagues said, and you know, about this call that some people feel that they are special and that they have to do something, and that psychedelics is really important. And that's so typical in the ayahuasca community. That is closer to what I research. And you know, everybody seems to have some kind of plant message from the plant. And you know, we even wanted to do a t-shirt said ayahuasca told me, because we think it would sell like crazy, because ayahuasca tells a lot of things to a lot of people. And I just want to tell this anecdote of our friend, that he was on an ayahuasca session, and he was there, and it was all night, and then he shouted to everybody and said, "I'm the one!" And then everybody was quiet and waiting. And then after a while he said, "I'm not the one." So like so this thing that you took psychedelics and you had a revelation and you have to do something and it's urgent, it's a very like kind of naive beginner's thinking. And the same thinking with this think of like, oh, we got to show everybody, and only if we give this to everybody, everything is going to be great and we're going to change everything. It's extremely naive. Those of us that have been around the corner and have been around the block know a lot of people that take a lot of psychedelics that are really problematic. So psychedelics, they don't solve all the problems of everybody. They really don't. And I think it's very naive. Oh, you know, now we're mainstreaming it. And finally, you know, this idea that once everybody has access to it, we're all going to be speaking a language. It's a kind of naive, pure, almost magical thinking, as if the substances themselves are these little creatures that will penetrate in us and do everything. But people are different, come from different cultures, have different values. And so I agree with what everybody said there. And I think there's another big, like there is a big confusion between the idea of access and the idea of criminalization. So because it's criminalized, because it's stigmatized, because it's forbidden, it's demonized, it's pathologized, it's criminalized, everybody has a kind of, trauma of that and are upset about that. So we want to fight the system and we want to change that, and we want to have our rights, and we want to be able to have access. Having access and being able to practice your religion, to follow your spiritual call, to join your community and consecrate your sacred plants or your psychedelics is entirely different than pushing this onto others, or than saying that this is, the solution for everything. We advocate for our right to use psychedelic plant medicines or psychedelics. We advocate for the right of the people that want to do this, not have their children taken away, not be fired from their jobs, not be stigmatized by their families, not to be persecuted in the media. That's entirely different than saying we need to fix the problem by telling everybody has to use this, and this is a solution for everything. And then, this distinction gets confused, because when you say I want to advocate for my right, you're not doing a messianic call that others should do it. And also it's that, naive thing. I tried it, I thought it was great, and now I'm going to push to everybody. And, there's much more of the commercial aspects, but I know you got your script. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Well, actually, we said we're not going to follow the script, but it's going to be organic conversation. But we have points that we need to cover. That's what we have. Thank you, Bea.
I just have a quick comment on that. Who was the person that said that if everybody did LSD, we would live in a much more better place? Who was it that said that?
Half of the people on Facebook that follow psychedelics say that.
No, there was someone. Was it the guy who? What is his name? I can't think of his name.
Well,
right
are you talking about Timothy Leary, who is wanted to put LSD in the water supply, that kind of thing? Or
somebody had written that if everybody did LSD, we'd be in a much better place, and they said this over like 40 years ago, and so obviously lots of people have done LSD since then, and look at our world today.
Right.
That's a great point. That's a very good point. We have audience telling us that's probably it's Timothy Leary, but there were also votes for Walt Disney, LOL, right. And Alcoholics Anonymous guy,
Bill Wilson.
Bill Wilson, yeah.
It may be a Bill Wilson, I don't know.
Just to add to that, I just wanted to name check a couple of people because because I've been working on this film about this, I've spoken to a couple of friends, and a couple of things Bea said, well, at first it really resonated with me what Bea was saying, but then also this golden period thing, I think is such an important point. It's the point Roz Watts makes in the film I'm doing. It's just kind of like, we all go through it. That's the point. We all go through this like, wow, that's how I was when I first discovered psychedelics. Like, oh my God, this is going to change the world. And then this kind of, it's a natural process. And then also, I think something worth naming is that like, Leo Rossman, who works at Imperial, I was talking to him about this. He was saying that it's a very natural process for people who've been in a community for a long time before it was cool to kind of close ranks when new people are coming in. And I've really been sitting with that for quite a few months, thinking like, is that what's happening? Are we just like bitter because we were there first? And to be really honest, I think that is a phenomena, but I think especially with psychedelics, everyone who, as Bea said, has been around the block, like we all were around the block when it was dangerous to do so. Like it was dangerous. Everyone had skin in the game. Everyone risked losing their job or potentially losing their children or whatever it might be. And so at the risk of being like a little bit controversial, I think we have a right to kind of to be deciding and like putting a voice in around what the ethics should be and what the approach should be, because I think there's so many people in the community who've sort of earned that experience. And it's really important to just, for me, it feels very important to kind of stand by that, even if it is a phenomena that people close ranks in community, maybe it's there for a reason.
Yeah, I would love to add to that actually. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the acknowledgement there actually, right? Because we should be acknowledging our own shadows, right? So, and I think it's a good question to ask ourselves, like to what extent are we kind of being territorial? Right. And we see new people showing up and are we kind of saying like, oh, wait, this is like my space. What are you doing here? I think it's an important question to ask. And at the same time, we shouldn't dismiss that as like, oh, this is just a bad thing to do. I think there are reasons for this, and like you were getting to, there are many of us who were working in this space before Michael Pollan had a best-selling book about it, and there's a lot of nuance to this space. And as we've all kind of observed here, there is this tendency, like when you first discover psychedelics, and I myself experienced it, like, oh my God, this is the thing, and like, oh my God, I'm supposed to be like this, that's the savior complex thing comes up in different forms. Like, I'm supposed to be I have to do the thing. And then if there's a progression there, and then you kind of, get up, usually soon after that, there comes a very humbling experience that brings you down to earth. A friend of mine told me about that. I don't know. And a lot of the folks that are showing up now and creating psychedelic startups, I think they do have good intentions, right? But a lot of them are in this early phase, and they had a psychedelic experience. They did mushrooms a couple times, and then they think, oh wow, and they got some download, and people are just, in my opinion, moving too fast. They're showing up and they're just trying to, like, they had the download. Ayahuasca told me, all that, and they're trying to figure out, trying to make the big company to do the thing without first just stopping and surveying the landscape and saying, like, wait a minute, what's already here? Who's already working on the space? What are the thought leaders already here? What is the work that's already being done? And I wish that if anybody who's running a psychedelic startup is watching this, I beg you, like, before you run and try to create the next big company that's going to change everything, and take some time, slow down, ground into the existing community, and because you have blind spots that you don't know about. That's why they're blind spots. But so many people are just moving fast, and that energy could be useful, and I want to welcome the enthusiasm, right? But it needs to be a little bit more. I think I would advise people to just take advice first from people, whoever you resonate with is already in the space, because someone's probably already been working on the thing you want to do for a lot longer. And that energy is way better given towards some existing project versus starting a new thing led by someone who doesn't have the right, there's so many startups now that are people that don't have experience in the space, and unintentionally they are doing harm. So that's a little thing I think is important.
I think just to add to, oh yeah, go on.
I think that also, to point out who those people are, Mike and Alex, on who has been doing this work for a long time, and that's indigenous people. And indigenous peoples are the ones who are continuing to be marginalized by their use. At some point, look at the communities in Gabon. The indigenous people there who use iboga now have limited access to their own plant. And that occurred because they had this enclosed circle that Alex talked about. They had this circle of trust, right? From the Fockers, they had this circle of trust, and they allowed someone to come in, and those people practice this really extractive process. And now these people are sitting there like, what the hell did we do? Very similar to what happened with Maria Sabina in Mexico. She had this practice, and she shared it with one person, and that person went and shared it with the rest of the world. Very similar practices that is happening with peyote. I mean, if you want to talk about, who the experts are, it's the indigenous people that have been using these plant medicines for time and immemorial.
Thank you, Dawn.
Actually, can I add to that too? We do. It's important also, as we're going to the indigenous stewards of all these medicines, that often gets done in an extractive way too, right? So we try to take what we like from indigenous traditions without reciprocity. So totally echoing what you said, we need to go to the indigenous stewards who have been holding this knowledge forever and enter into that relationship correctly, not just take the things I like from that because these people are the experts, so I'm going to take the things I know from them. But there has to be a right relationship there.
Exactly, and I think it has to be a relationship based on some consensual agreements, not just some silly little IRB, right? It's got to be a lot more heartwarming and more sincere than that.
Is anything to add to this before we move on? Cool. Next one, the next argument to unpick is the scaling. That it's a necessary tactic to scale psychedelic healing to have the most positive global impact. I think Ali looks like he wants to talk to this. No.
No,
I
no.
want to say something about this.
Okay.
I just, I'm just an anthropologist. I'm not a business person. So my disclaimer, for me, it looks really like pushy and dumb all the way again, because it's like saying, oh, we need to have a huge Starbucks chain so everybody can have coffee. No, we don't. We can have a little coffee shop in many different places. It's like this idea that only a big corporate model will save us and we need to do this fast and quick. It's thinking on the same lines of the society we live in. And hey, everybody, now we got a global pandemic. It's not really working out very well for us. So more than ever, we're faced with the limitations, and indigenous people, to come back to Dawn's point, have faced voluntary isolation for years. Like a lot of, if you study the history of indigenous people in South America, a lot of them hide and try to proactively have no contact and be isolated as a form of survival. So we are kind of all feeling a little bit what indigenous people have felt throughout history, of having this global epidemics that can kill you, and we need to distance ourselves from one another. So this model of big corporations and we need to scale up and we need to do it fast is all part of the same thinking. If only we go and we give as much psychedelics as possible to as many as people as possible, we're gonna end the most suffering as possible. I think it can work on a lot of cases. I think it's true that we have a very serious mental health crisis, and we have a lot of loss, and suicide and depression and anxiety are really global. But I think we can build models that are community owned, that are involve consultation, that involve reciprocity, that involve dialogue. And I don't think that people need, the main reason to follow those corporate models starts with M. It's called money. It's not because it's the only way. And so I think when we talk about there is the enthusiasts and the naivete, but also there is just the opportunism and greed. And that's real too. A lot of people are coming into the space because they see this as the new golden rush. There's a lot of money coming from the field of cannabis, a lot of people that made a lot of money very fast and want to develop. And I haven't done an ethnography of these businesses, but I met a few of the folks and, leaders. And I think a lot of them just chose psychedelics because they think it's profitable. It's not because they are personally enchanted, or maybe I guess everybody has a history of a niece or a son or somebody that had a deep problem that changed their life. There's always a story like that. But I still think that a lot is just interest, frankly, corporate interests, and to seeing also a kind of quick fix that will make a lot of money in an easy way, because also people want that, huh? Who wants to work a lot and take many years to make money? So a lot of people are just really opportunistic. And yeah, I forgot what was the original question. It was about scaling. I would love to hear what others think about scaling.
Yeah, I think those are really good points. And for me also, I think a good parallel is mindfulness. And to look at what happens when you scale ancient wisdom, or try to, in the system we live in.
And yoga as well.
Yoga is a great point. Yeah, you don't get the depth scaled. You get a kind of simulation of the depth scaled to the lowest common denominator, and you get this cookie cutter version of it. Like I used to teach, I'm a mindfulness instructor, And I was, teaching mindfulness in companies during the sort of mindfulness boom era, and it was soul destroying because it was bullshit. Because I didn't do this corporately, but when we had a meditation studio, I remember one time getting a little bit frustrated and saying that, really mindfulness is a training for death. It's about learning how to die. And I've never seen a room like completely go cold that quickly. And it was this big kind of juxtaposition between the actual practice and what people have been told it is, and how it fits into the lifestyle of making them bigger, better, faster, stronger, get their next promotion. That's my main thing on scaling, is you don't get the thing itself, because the thing itself requires sacrifice, pain, depth, time, a lot of time, like psychedelics do, with preparation, integration, huge amount of care and love within the experience itself, a huge amount of, to Dawn's point, honoring where it came from, honoring the tradition. Like, it requires so much, and we don't live in a society that tends to select for that kind of depth and slowness as well.
Exactly, and it becomes this like tool for self-growth, which then feeds the whole capitalistic system. Because if we're feeling better and our well-being is better, then we'll be more productive. And this is the narrative right now from both yoga, mindfulness, as you said, and psychedelics. I remember when a company I worked for, which is a big company, wanted to send me for mindfulness course, because they were sending all the workers because they thought they would be more productive. And it's just really sad to see this happening to psychedelics now. Anyways, anyone else wants to share?
Yeah, I think that a part of this idea of scaling too, I think it really needs to come back down to like complete foundation, like looking at the plants. What is it that the plants need? Do they need water? Yes, we need water, right? So in our society, we can't even take care of our water. Like right now, like in the state of Idaho, you can collect rainwater, but in other states, collecting rainwater is illegal. You have to buy your water now because our natural water sources are contaminated. So if we can't take care of our water, what makes us think that we're going to take care of our plants? How are we going to take care of our plants if we have contaminated water? I mean, that if you want to talk about scaling, let's scale that down to like complete foundation.
Yeah, and to add to that's kind of the basis of our whole economic system, is take something away that's in the commons, that's free to everybody, and then sell it back to you, right? And so happening with water, take away water that historically, who paid for water, right? And then selling it back to people. And that's what's happening now with mushrooms, right? Mushrooms grow in the ground. And now let's limit access to psychedelics, to mushrooms, because we're going to keep them Schedule 1, but we're going to patent this particular flavor of psilocybin that we're going to get FDA approved, and then sell it back to you. And this, there's just these very foundational problems with the economic system as a whole that are probably beyond the scope of this talk. But we have an economic model, right, that is constantly exacerbating the wealth disparity. The gap's just widening and widening and widening. And that is a foundational problem of a lot of the environmental destruction, of poverty. We have people that can't get food. That's not had anything to do with the ability to produce food, right? It has to. This is an artificial scarcity. So we have these deep, fundamental problems with the economic model, where those who have access to capital, those who have the most money, invest it, right? Give their money under the condition that I get more money back, right? So do the math here. The people who have the most money only give their money under the condition that they get more of it back. That by definition is going to widen the wealth disparity. So if you have a psychedelic startup that wants to scale psilocybin using this type of economic model, so it's the problem and the solution in the same package. You're going to cure depression and trauma using the very economic systems that are creating such widespread issues in the first place. So it's not solving the problem, it's actually adding to the problem. And that is what so many of these new psychedelic startups are doing. They are, and they're showing up. And this is, I like to say, is the dog wagging the tail, or is the tail wagging the dog, right? So if this money that's showing up in the space has so much potential to do good in the world, right? But it's not, most of the money showing up into the psychedelic community now isn't showing up first and asking the question, surveying the landscape, checking the needs, figuring out what are the needs right now? How do I best meet the needs right now with all this power, all this money? What the money is doing that's showing up is saying, hey, how do I plant my flag? It's a new form of colonialism. How do I plant my flag? How do I stake my territory? The money's asking, how do I get more of myself? How do I get more money? And so the tail is wagging the dog, right? And it's not to say money is necessarily bad. We, those of us who are in the activism and nonprofits, we need money too. And the UK Psychedelic Society, as Bia mentioned, has figured out a way to make a sustainable organization, and that's awesome. The distinction here is the UK Psychedelic Society, you guys didn't set out and say, hey, how do we make a business here? You were mission first. You were like, hey, this is something I believe in, and in order to meet that goal, we need this amount of money. What's happening now in psychedelic startups is the opposite. It's saying, oh, here's an opportunity to make money. Cool, because psychedelics are this new cool thing, and the psychedelics are a means to the ends, the ultimate ends being the money itself. And that is the problem. And I can give an example here of, and there's different degrees of it. Some of it is more egregious than others. So the most egregious, like Compass Pathways, I'll just name them, right? It's very egregious. You're trying to patent psilocybin, or they did patent psilocybin, or a polymorph of psilocybin. In my opinion, a not very valid patent. Annie Oak of Lucid News wrote a whole article about this, about the disputes on that patent. So I would check that out. And presenting themselves as a nonprofit, switching to a for-profit, lots of really sketchy things. But even like patenting an existing molecule being the most egregious example, but even like there's other things that are problematic too. I have respect for, say, the Shulginists, right? There are people that are chemistry nerds that are like figuring out, because they're passionate, figuring out new chemistry, new molecules, and that's great. But when you're trying to figure out new molecules just because that's the patent strategy, right? We have molecules that work and that work well, right? So if you're a chemistry nerd, you want to make new molecules because that's your calling in life, awesome. But all these startups that are trying to develop new molecules just so they can secure IP, or trying to develop new molecules, like Field Trip, I'll just name them too. They have a press release recently. As we formulated our drug development strategy, we focused on new molecules that, one, offer shorter duration of psychedelic experiences to make them more practical and convenient for use in the clinic. That's really important to note. And I'll kind of skip ahead here. And then also would be simple to synthesize while differentiated and structurally distinct from psilocybin or other existing 5-HT2A receptor agonists, translation, patentable, right? And not to say that people at Field Trip don't also have good intentions, that they don't also want to heal. I believe them, that they also want to heal. But this quote, and I'll link to it, it just tells you what the priorities are. The priority is it going to be convenient in the clinic? And is it going to be patentable? The priority isn't how can we do the most healing for the most people.
And the patent drama is big right now. I mean, how many times Compass applied for patenting their methods of synthesizing psilocybin? That was some kind of like a comedy in a way.
They tried like 27 times.
27 times, and they kept being rejected because like the way they were producing was like the original way, and they just had to keep changing the patent applications. That's right, Mike?
Yeah, I just sent a link to the to two things on the chat here, to the press release from Field Trip and also this Lucid News article that I mentioned Annie Oak wrote. She has a 3-part series. So Annie, I would point to Annie's article for breaking down the Compass patent. But my understanding is they, sorry, what was the question? Like, what did they actually patent?
No, it's just like, why 27 attempts?
Yeah, well, they were throwing spaghetti at the wall until they saw something that stuck. They didn't have anything actually novel or non-obvious. They just were throwing spaghetti until eventually they got something accepted.
So yes, that's the patent drama. Do we have anything to ask? To add about the scaling argument? No, I think no.
I like this point that Mike makes, and it goes back to what Dawn says. Like, I want to be the leader. I want to help versus I want to serve and I want to support where there is need. So it's completely different if you just found out psychedelics and you're interested. How can I I have millions of dollars. I was invited to a podcast the other day, and I looked the guy up, and I said, "Is there an honorarium?" No, there's no honorarium. And then I said, "Well, perhaps you can say to the owner of this company who had made $250 million in his previous company, if he would like to give me a honorarium, like 100, 150, anything helps." And then they came back and they said, "Oh yeah, he's happy to give you a $250 honorarium." So I just, it just calls my attention, like these people that have millions of dollars that they want to invest and they say they like psychedelics. Why don't they take part of that attention to see how can they support the efforts that exist? How can they support indigenous people? How can they support grassroots community organizations? How can they support women? How can they support people of color? How can they support queer people? And so this idea of service, and I see my nonprofit at the service. The Chacruna Institute for Plant Medicines, we named it after ayahuasca. We see ourselves at the service of this plant, of our teachings, our blessings, our spiritual revelations, our comfort, our punishments, the lessons we were taught. And how can you better advance supporting understanding, supporting reflection, supporting community, supporting destigmatization, supporting decriminalisation? And that's a different vocation.
That just reminds me this recent problem with the conferences. I don't remember which of those conferences it was, but one of them was kind of giving a call out to the psychedelic people to form new societies. And I think they were even offering money to people to start setting up new psychedelic entities. And I think me and Mike were so angry at this because we obviously both very engaged in running or mentoring psychedelic sites around the world for a few good years now. And it just kind of felt like slap in the face. Didn't it, Mike?
Yeah, well, it's that, and it comes back to this thing of like, this idea of, oh, I'm gonna be the solution versus looking at what's already happening and supporting. If you care about psychedelic community, step one is look for what's already out there and support it. And if it doesn't exist yet, whatever the thing if you really take a good hard look and it doesn't exist yet, then yeah, great, you should create that thing. That might be your calling. But most of the time, I'm finding out people like didn't even bother Googling it. They just like, oh, I'm gonna do the thing. And to Bia's point, actually, also when I respond to that, there's because we have this community that historically is activists and nonprofits, and we all help each other. We've all historically helped each other for little to no money, mentoring each other, helping, and a lot of the new startups are taking advantage of that. Like they want to use that goodwill, and it's like because we're this community that's so giving, like they expect us to do that for them too. But meanwhile, oh yeah, but I'm just going to use it for my profit and not give you an honorarium, not show any reciprocity, and it's kind of like, I still to this day continue to do so much work for free, and I love to do it, but I'm not going to do it though if someone's got a for-profit company and they want to get free advice from them. No, pay me a consulting fee if you're going to use the knowledge I have that I've gained over years of work in this space to make profit. Then if you're going to be generating value, you need to share that value that's generated with everyone who helped you to generate the value.
I agree. I get asked all the time, and I'm doing the same now because it's sad to see, just like Bia said with the honoraries and stuff, the conferences that those people threw. I don't think any of the speakers were paid, and they were charging for tickets. So anyways, anything to add about the scaling, or shall we move to the next point? I think we can move to the next one.
Talk about the conferences too, or?
I think at some point, yes, but we still have two arguments to unpick, but we're good on time. So funding expensive FDA trials, that money are needed for funding expensive FDA trials. Therefore, we need big people with big money.
I mean, this just highlights the problem with the medical system itself, right? Like my right to use a psychedelic doesn't even depend on it having a medical value, right? So that's the idea that we even have to prove medical value to have the right to put a substance into our body. That's the fundamental flaw right there. the fact that we even have to do this dog and pony show of like going through the FDA trials for stuff that's been known for thousands of years, and I understand it strategically though, right? I understand why, Rick Doblin took this strategy. It was, he realized that like, oh, this is a way you can make a wedge into the culture by taking MDMA through FDA trials. So I understand it but of course, for Rick, that's not the end goal in and of itself, was not medicalizing MDMA. So what's happening now is people are taking this pathway that was created for a purpose. Rick pioneered, and Rick and also the folks at Hopkins and others, they pioneered this this strategy of going through FDA trials in order to make this change start happening. But now folks are kind of making that like it's the end goal. Like, oh, the end goal is I'm gonna raise money so I can patent a molecule, take my patented molecule through the FDA, and then we can sell it to people, as though that's the goal. And it's just missing the point. So no, we don't need to have this mainstreaming model or this big corporations model because it's what's required for the FDA process. No, we just need to end the drug war.
Yeah, and just something that comes up for me is that, so just trying to play devil's advocate in my head, where it's like, what are the benefits of going the mainstream way with something like an FDA approval process? Yeah, safety and efficacy, etc. But like, as Mike mentioned, we do know that these substances, from thousands of years of indigenous use, are safe in some ways. But what you do get to some degree, which we don't have now, which would be great to have in maybe from a more grassroots bottom-up approach, is a system of checks and balances that allows some kind of supervision for people going into a psychedelic experience or holding psychedelic experiences. Because what I've seen of the underground world and various ceremonies is that it's rife with abuse, it's rife with narcissism, it's rife with people not being trauma aware, and really just there's no oversight or supervision. So, and in many cultures that use psychedelics over history, that oversight and supervision came from a very strong internal core of a group of people and elders, and a kind of culturally understood way of approaching these medicines. We don't have that here in the West, at least. We don't have that. So I think it is important that we find some way to have a proper system of responsibility and care, but that doesn't necessarily have to be through the way that we traditionally approach pharmaceutical medicines. So it's a kind of two different things, but they get wrapped up together because that, and so that's, I think that it's a kind of a subtle thing to unpick, but I think both, I think that does need to be unpicked.
And to clarify here, I'm not against medical, the FDA or having psychedelics available as medicine. I'm against it being the exclusive way that people get access. And I'm against the idea that you need that proven medical use in order to be able to do it. I'm all for, some people do feel more comfortable going through that particular paradigm. And so by all means, like, sure, take it through the FDA, as long as you're not trying to position yourself like some startups like MindMed. They said they're taking psychedelics through FDA trials. Meanwhile, the director says, but I want nothing to do with those people that want to decriminalize psychedelics. Translation is, I'm the only, my show is the only game in town. If you're getting your psychedelics anywhere else but the patented FDA approved molecules I have, you should still be going to jail for that. And that's a problem to me. And I agree also with you that alternative pathways that are not in the FDA structure need accountability, need elders, need some kind of structure around that.
But that's the Western practice though, right? Is that there has to be these laws and policies and regulation. And bottom line, the government's got to get paid.
True. Dia, anything to add?
Yeah, I think I am also not against the medical model. I think there's space for everything. I think that science is important, and I think that you can have different applications. I am personally more thrilled and more intellectually, stimulated by this traditional uses and ceremonial uses and the idea of the whole plant. I mean, the whole thing is very trying to fit a square into a hole to start off with, because if you think what traditional populations tell us about sacred plants, is that this is really related to a whole. it's related to identity, it's related to territory, it's related to spirituality, it's related to the medical dimension, to socialization, to celebration. And also these plants, they are used for multiple things. They are food for the body and for the soul. It's not just, one molecule with the application to one thing. And this is also kind of funny because you get this substances and you say, well, I'll try this for PTSD. No, I'll better try it for depression. No, you know what? I think the best application of this is addiction. And then you can have a board of, bureaucrats and checking, different science, oh no, we should definitely go for anxiety. Oh no, but there's more market for depression. I mean, these things are good for you as a whole. They teach you how to be human. They teach you how to be humble. They teach you that you don't know anything. They teach you that you are just, a little piece of nothing in the universe. So the whole medical model, it's limited. It's limited application of what the substances are. And I think we have to learn with the people that came before us, with traditional people, and rethink our categories, our paradigms, the ways by which we classify the world, we understand the world, we create relationships and hierarchies between things. The very language, the categories that we have at our disposal are very, very limited. And it's not for nothing that we have a hard time explaining our psychedelic experiences, because they teach us things that are very different. So how much of this complexity can we have in the medical model? Sure, you can help people for things, but there's other uses. And I'm here celebrating these other uses. I'm wearing my Trikrina t-shirt that says honor and protect sacred plants. So that's, I think that's the thing that I find more interesting, that I find more appealing, and just find a true honor to be able to learn about this and learn that healing and disease, it's not just a virus or something that you can identify in a scan, because healing it's a more holistic affairs, people. Healing is a more global thing. It has to do with the relationships that we have with ourselves, that we have with our family, we have with our kinship, that we have with the invisible world, with the world of the ancestors, with the spiritual world, with the world of animals. So we learn from traditional people that healing is a complex thing. And these substances talk about a lot of things and not just one substance, one molecule for one disease. So the medical model, sure, kudos for the scientists, and God bless, may they succeed. But there's other things that are, I think, much more interesting. And I have heard there's some scientists that want to do clinical trials with ayahuasca in the United States. And they ask me what I think. I feel tired, I think it's so silly. It's so superficial to put ayahuasca in a lab. Yuck, and have a medical doctor giving it to me and measuring me. No thanks. But I'm not going to lobby against it. I'm not going to start a march in downtown San Francisco with signs against it. I just think, huh?
Why not?
Why not? Well, I think there's space for that as well, if that is needed. The sad thing, the paradox is that we need to do that. So the people that want to use ayahuasca ceremonially can be left alone. After we put in this machine and we spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars and years of research, then we have this green light to not bully the people that are using this traditionally. So that's a vicious cycle. So we need to have that kind of legitimacy to be left alone, to eat our plants, to drink our medicines. That's a paradox, I think. But then again, there is space for that. Sure, there is space for that. It's important. Well, it might help some people. Yes.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you're saying, Bia. I hear what you're saying, but I also think too that by saying that people need to look at the indigenous practices and the way that indigenous people do ceremony, I think that's also a part of this shadow of mainstreaming psychedelics problem that we have, because there's a lot of cultural misappropriation that's happening. I'm hearing stories about people integrating peyote into ayahuasca ceremonies. Those are two completely different ceremonies, and vice versa. And hearing, you know, some I'm going to use quotes, air quotes here, some Native American church chapter trying to fight to bring cannabis into the Native American church, saying that cannabis is a part of his, you know, indigenous historical practices with the Native American church. No, it's not. And so that's a part of this shadow of psychedelic issues that we have when we start talking about, you know, indigenous practices and indigenous ceremonies. We see that far too often. It's completely extractive, it's spiritually dangerous, and it can lead to serious harm. I mean, look at what happened in Arizona with I forget his name. His last name was Ray, or maybe his first name was Ray, but he was practicing this sweat lodge ceremony and was charging thousands and thousands of dollars for people to come and partake in this indigenous sweat lodge ceremony, and he killed people. We talked about that for a couple of years. Why aren't we talking about that again?
I agree. I think it just because you're saying you're looking at two indigenous people doesn't mean that, you know, that's the solution and all the uses are going to be legitimate. There are people also doing a lot of abuse on this area, the equivalents, and a lot of misappropriation and scams, frankly. I just gave an interview that people were asking about, you know, we have a little series in Chacruna called Ayahuasca during COVID time. It's a little mirror to Love During Cholera from Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And my quote was, the people that were doing scams, they invented new scams during COVID. And it's working. They're doing, like, you know, microdosing, that you send a special dose. And the people that were being ethical, they are still being ethical. So I agree that there is a lot of misappropriation, especially due to Native American special rights. With peyote, there has been a lot of people creating Native American churches so that they could have allegedly protections, and also sell cards, like a membership of $1,000 a year or $250 a month, and saying that with that you're protected, which is just simply not true. And I also agree there's a lot of mishmash of everything, and the famous shamanic cocktail of people just thinking that the substances are interchangeable and you can combine all of them together. But when I reference indigenous knowledge and indigenous people, I do think there's a lot of, you know, true and sincere practitioners that have learned from indigenous people and have ethical relations, and not all of them are based on this extractivism. And
But what
so
gives
I
them
think,
the right to charge for those kinds of ceremonies?
well, it depends on the tradition. For example, on South America, traditionally people have charged for ayahuasca, and that's not considered, that there is a lot of variation between different contexts. I know that in the US, in the context of peyote, it is very, very, you know, considered very negative to charge for ceremonies, although there is a legal market to sell peyote. For example, in South America, it's like Brazil, it's very, very considered very like inappropriate to sell ayahuasca, but you know, there's different cultural, I'd say, references depending on the region and the geography. I don't think there is just one rule, and the money is just not, you know, the only element as well. Are these relationships based on equity? There's a lot of retreat centers in that in Iquitos and in you know, in other parts of the Amazon that are owned by foreigners, that the indigenous people are like the servants, or, you know, the chauffeurs or the maids, or, and there's a lot of discrepancies, there's a lot of inequalities, there's a lot of abuse in that area as well. We published a document called Reflections on the Commodification of Ayahuasca. We tried to address a little bit. There's other people that have more, I think, partnerships that are based on long-term relationships and more trust relationships and more, you know, true partnerships, and having, don't tokenize indigenous people. I mean, the first thing you can see when you visit an ayahuasca retreat center is like, do they have all the photos of the Western facilitators with their name and bio, and then just a generic indigenous person without a name and without an ethnicity? So there's a spectrum. I think there's different people doing different things.
You know, something that's coming up for me listening to all that is like there's another weird shadow aspect of the culture as a whole, is right? Like substances are only valid if they're either medicine or religious. And these are like the two valid categories. And because of this, that's why you're seeing people say, oh, well, cannabis is part of my church, or here's a card that shows you're part of this thing. And that, you know, it's this idea that, well, freedom of religion in the US particularly, right? Like freedom of religion protects you. And so because there's these limited narrow windows of what's valid, people are trying to, in invalid ways, push their things as fitting under those categories. And we're doing it in the spirit, in the religion side. We're saying this is part of my religion, you know, adding things into that. And then on the medicine side, we're trying to fit psychedelics into this box of medicine that they don't really neatly fit into, because medicine is so, it's like, as it stands today, largely, right, it's very reductionist, it's very material based. I'm going to link here to this article I wrote last year. It kind of touches on a lot of this, about this concept they call PEACH, which is psychedelic education and community healing. It goes into some things I've already talked about, but the first piece, the education, is we need education around that these are a little bit different than what we think of as medicine. This isn't like a pill that you take two and call me in the morning and it's a biochemical reaction that just does a thing to you. This is an experience that you're having. The experience is the medicine. And you know, you have research now. DARPA is trying to do research to try to find new psychedelics that have the medical benefit of curing your depression, but they don't have that inconvenient side effect of the trip. And it's sort of like this fundamental misunderstanding of the mechanism of psychedelics. And we, like, our cultures doesn't, it's like we forgot that what is life but an experience is, you know, we forgot like what this whole thing is. Like, what is life? We are experiencing things, and we try to reduce it down into this made up idea of what is a physical material thing. Like even in physics, matter isn't matter, matter isn't, you know, if you're going to get deep enough into that, but we've somehow convinced ourselves that the basis of everything is this material, and that's coming out, and it's a shadow of our culture. And then as a result now, another shadow coming up.
For some people's culture, Mike.
Sorry?
For some people's
Sorry?
culture.
Yeah,
For
some people's culture.
culture.
You know, in this dominant Western paradigm of, you know, it's a very material minded thing. And hopefully that evolves, and I think it is. But you know, another shadow that's coming from that is because we're trying to treat psychedelics like they're materials and not experiences, in that FDA approval process, guess what?
Or that they're alive, right? Or that they're alive.
Right. And then what's happening in this FDA approved version of psychedelics, not only is it not a requirement for a psychedelic therapist to have their own experience, but oftentimes it's not even available as an option. So like, get this, right? Currently, right now, there are psychedelic therapists being trained, and part of their training does not involve doing psychedelics. Sometimes, you know, MAPS had an optional MDMA experience, although I think that study is over, the MT1 study. I don't know if MT2 was approved or not yet, but you know, in the case of psilocybin, to my knowledge, people being trained as psilocybin therapists don't even have an opportunity to do psilocybin. So in the near future, we're going to have people that are guiding others through psychedelic experiences who have never done the experience themselves. And this, you know, this is all because of this weird material we think it's just a material. And to me, it's absurd to think that you could possibly, it's like saying you're going to train someone to scuba dive, but you've never strapped on a tank yourself. You know, it's insane. And that's what's happening right now.
It is very insane and scary. And also, I think, to add with the biomedical moment, what is lacking is the lack of understanding of real integration and community aspect. Because obviously you can heal someone from PTSD or addiction, but if they go back straight to their regular environment, which is still toxic, they're gonna slip back into, you know, depression or addiction very quickly. And this is something that is really, I suppose, lacking right now.
Oh yeah, in the ibogaine world, right? The idea that we're going to give everyone ibogaine and we're going to cure the opioid epidemic by giving people ibogaine. And yeah, I did a lot of actually worked on a whole series of articles about ibogaine a few years ago, and I think is really important, right? Because yes, ibogaine does have this amazing quality to it that it can reliably disrupt opioid withdrawal. So it's a very powerful tool in the arsenal. But if you someone has a relationship with a substance for a reason, right? And so you give them ibogaine, you disrupt their withdrawal, great. But if you don't fix the deeper systemic issues that they were self-medicating for, usually is the case, right, in the first place, you didn't solve anything. And again, we treat addiction like it's the problem. Addiction is a symptom. And that's what I get in this article too, with the talk about community healing. We can't just use psychedelics to cure addiction. No, we need to do deeper work, or deeper community systemic level healing.
There's also just a theme I see kind of from everyone sharing right now is that, so there's the community aspect, but one thing that's really intangible, Mike was mentioning like looking at materials rather than the sort of the intangible we can't feel. What's incredibly intangible is individual integrity. But that is the thing that is absolutely required from any facilitator, from anyone holding space with a medicine. For the film I'm working on now, I spoke to Maestro Jose Lopez, who works at the Temple of the Way of Light, which to Bia's point, I think is one of the much better places in Iquitos. And he was talking about the Shipibo process of becoming an ayahuasquero or ayahuasquera, and that is a process which is a process of an intangible feeling that the plant and the people around you have of like, yeah, you've got your shit together. You have worked through enough of your stuff to be able to hold space, and you have a certain level of wisdom really to be able to do that. And I think it's a question that hasn't come up so much in this mainstreaming conversation about like how much integrity do scientists have. Scientists are human beings. How much, this is something that I asked during one of the North Stars, which is the ethics process, one of their kind of town hall meetings. I was like, if we don't start from the point of recognizing that we all have a susceptibility to bad behavior, and that a scientist earning, I don't know, 40,000 pounds a year, how much integrity do they need to have if a pharma company offers them £1 million to give an ethics stamp? That's the kind of issue. And the problem with that, or a real difficult thing with that, is that to measure that, you do need a community. You need a community talking to each other, reflecting to each other, being like, yo, this person is really, really a big asshole, so don't work with them. And it's very, very difficult to do that unless, as a psychedelic community, we have some kind of cohesion with each other and ourselves, And one of the beautiful things about this community is that we're all really individualist, and we're all kind of exploring an individualist kind of, at least in our culture, kind of process. But it like coming together and having some kind of container that allows and reflects on ethical behavior is key, because you cannot remove individual integrity from this process. Scientists, practitioners, anybody.
Lovely, thank you. Sorry, have I done had next point?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Because I'm very curious. We have not much time left, so we're gonna have to moderate a bit more now.
Yeah, it slipped my mind what I was going to say, but I think, going back to what Alex said too about, this idea of ethics, I think that's, that is one of the dark sides of mainstreaming, because if you pay anybody enough money, they'll say whatever you want. I mean, how do we determine who has ethics and who doesn't?
Yeah, I'd love to add to that too. We need that kind of structure. There's some kind of way of knowing, like, is this person like suitable to be a guide, right? I don't know what that looks like, but it's not the right now, like, for example, MAPS expanded access to MDMA. What is the qualification that you can be an MDMA guide? It's like, okay, you went through the MAPS training and you have a doctorate degree. That's great, but like having a doctorate degree is not what qualifies you to be a good guide. It's like, that's like saying, we're, coming back to the scuba diving metaphor. It's like saying, who is going to be a scuba dive trainer? Well, we're going to make it based on who's really good swimmers. It's like, yeah, it's in the water, but like being a good swimmer is not the same thing as scuba diving. So like to use like having a doctorate degree as the measure, that's the measure we use in our culture, is like, did you get this particular degree? Did you go through this amount of schooling? And that's what qualifies you to be a guide. But it needs to be things like, what's your experience with the medicine? Are you a person of integrity? And we don't have anything close to the things that would identify who's actually a good guide.
Right. But you get people, falsifying even that kind of information. There's books out there right now, people claiming to have attended, X number of ceremonies, and no one can validate that for them. They've made up people. Oh, they've died. I was in training with X and X elder, but now they're dead. They can't verify that. I mean, this whole psychedelic world is full of that stuff.
My favorite is...
I'm gonna jump into what Dawn said about you give people some amount of money and they say what you want. I think that the harder thing, like, it's getting so blurred nowadays, all the areas, philanthropy, journalism, startups, psychedelic societies, clinics, retreats, all these areas, it's happening on all of them. The mainstreaming is going to all of these areas. So also before you had, like, I don't know, publications that were more, grassroots, autonomous. You had certain underground groups that were doing like local things. You had certain local communities doing things. Now all of them, the money is coming in and the mainstreaming is happening on all the areas. And then it's just very hard because these folks with money, they come, and who are they going to hire? A lot of times they are going to hire the people that are around, because those are the people with expertise. So all these new businesses, they get the researchers that have been doing research for years with very little funding, with like philanthropy, because there was no money, or they want to create a publication. They hire somebody that is from the field, and then they create this kind of hybrid things that each time more you're seeing scientists working on this mainstream companies, sitting on the board of the mainstream companies, even some like owners of psychedelic nonprofits or community organizations investing on the for-profits. So it just gets very blurred, and I think it really, like, money talks. And if you get offered a good salary to work in one of these companies as a researcher, and you typically have not had a good salary and have struggled, and you would really like to work on this area, and it's your dream to do good and help people, and then you're just going to say, no, I'm going to decline this offer because I don't think this company stands to the higher stance, when it's not even clear how do we measure them. And there's just another one popping up by the minute. And so if I don't join this one, they're going to hire somebody much worse than me. And it's the same happening in all areas. This conferences is the same thing. You pop a new conference. The first 10, we're really mad and shocked. And then we get tired, and then you see all your friends joining the conferences. And then what do you say? Like, it's just very hard. It's becoming very complex, very big, very fast, very complex, and hard to have clear criteria. And yes, to Dawn's point, I think, how much does it cost? And yes, money talks. They end up getting people. And I particularly am concerned about the topics of conferences and publications, but I know we're on time. So I don't know if you're still planning to bring that on. I did want to say something about that, but I'll give it back to you.
I think what we can do, I want to unpick one more argument here, and then we'll go Q&As of the audience, and I'll try to weave in the conference in there before we end. I promise that. It's a solid promise. Last one to unpick, which is, will be competition between pharma companies and clinics will benefit patients by improving quality of treatment.
I have one.
I like that
answer.
Mike was immediately unmuting himself. I want to do it.
You know what will benefit people more than competition is cooperation.
Agreed, agreed. And actually, we are worried that this competition will be mostly about saving money and cutting down on proper, screening people properly, and actually the proper therapy. I think Alex wants to add something to this already.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that happens with competition is that you keep data for yourself, and you keep lessons and insights, and what you learn, you don't share it. You don't want to share it because you want to act on those insights. And that is the last thing we need right now, because we are really quite new to working with psychedelics in the particular psychological and economic and social context that we're in. We really incredibly new. And so we're still figuring out how to do it. And we have no idea. We have no idea how to do it well within our culture. And so what we need is a kind of open source, iterative process of sharing and openness and transparency to go, okay, well, we've noticed that you can't do less than 3 integrations, or we've noticed that if someone has this situation, you can't send them home for 5 days just because it's not, you just need all of that kind of insight to be shared. And if it's not, it's just going to get progressively worse, I think.
And this whole, it's sort of like, Charles Eisenstein calls this the story of separation versus entering what we're now the story of reunion. And this is all kind of part of that story of separation, less for you is more for me. And this idea that, I have to guard my data, and I have to, get my patents, and I have to, we have to compete. And it's embedded in our biology. We think that, this idea that evolution is actually because of all this competition, and to an extent, sure. And also a lot of evolution has come about due to cooperation. And that's this under in the current actually teachings of it, it's this under emphasized aspect of what evolution looks like in practice and in history. It's been a lot of cooperation.
Totally, as you say, we all mentor each other for like last 5 years and help each other accomplish everything, really. Anything to add to this last argument? I think that's it. I have something before we go to Q&As from the audience. I actually have a question to Dawn, because we didn't cover much of that, and it's very important for me to raise issue of that. I wanted you to speak to the extractive practice that is occurring among indigenous communities in North America. We spoke tiny bit, but not too much. And also, I would love for you to speak a bit more about the peyote, actually, the environmental issues surrounding peyote popularity.
Yeah, sure. So we did talk a little bit about some of that when it comes to, ceremony and cultural misappropriation, because a lot of that is happening. It's been happening for, over 100 years. You get a lot of people who are, serving non-Indigenous people. I should put that out there, that it's usually non-Indigenous people who are claiming to be these ceremonial roadmen, charging individuals for ceremony. And that's happening, nationally, and most likely it's going to extend globally. But I think that, one of the largest issues that's currently, and it has been an issue for at least 100 years as well, is that peyote is an endangered species. It's classified right now as vulnerable, but with the practices that are happening now, particularly in relation to what is happening with decrim resolutions and the inclusion of peyote and even the terminology mescaline containing cacti, there's still this conception that peyote is still included, and it is, because it says mescaline containing cacti. And so myself and the Indigenous Peyote Conservation Initiative, we have been working with organizations to be really explicit about what mescaline containing cacti is, and really leaving peyote out of those decriminalized resolutions, because peyote has been excluded or has been decriminalized for Indigenous people. But I think, going back to the question, is that one of the threats that decriminalized resolutions is having on peyote is the fact that people are now, thinking that they now have this right to possess peyote. And so they're going to peyote habitats and they're harvesting these plants and they're harvesting them improperly, which is going to have ultimately detrimental effects on the future of peyote. This doesn't lead to propagation of these plants. And so I think one of the take-home messages that I would like people to have is that they should be mindful that peyote in the United States is a protected plant for use by members of federally recognized tribes, and that they should by all means refrain from harvesting any wild peyote populations.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
There are some people who make the argument that nobody owns peyote and that it's the right of all of us.
That who owns peyote?
Sorry?
I didn't catch what you said.
So there are some people who have made this argument that, well, a plant belongs to everybody. Nobody owns peyote. It's all of ours. What would you say to those folks?
I would agree. Nobody owns peyote. I would absolutely agree that nobody owns peyote. And that's why I continually fight that peyote should have the opportunity to grow for peyote itself. I mean, we're completely impacting its habitat there, through exurban development, through wind turbine development, through cattle grazing, agriculture, but humans are the largest threats to endangered plants like peyote. And so, no, I don't think anybody should make claims to who owns anything.
Well, and that argument being made.
But I also believe that there's a responsibility. So for me, myself, as a peyote user, I have a responsibility to make sure that this plant continues to grow, not just so I can have it in ceremony, but so that peyote is there for several generations away, so that peyote can live forever, not just so we can have access, not just so, someone who studied peyote for 6 weeks can get a certificate to teach this ceremony. No, it should be able to live for peyote itself.
Yeah, and to clarify that question too, that argument is usually made in the case of like nobody owns it, therefore everyone has the right to use peyote, as kind of a case that some people are making. And I guess I was curious what you would say to that specifically. Like, no one owns it. I have as much a right to use it as anybody else.
Well, I think that we all talked about that here in this panel. We had talked about how right now we're talking about decriminalization, right? Because obviously people are using psychedelic plants. People are getting caught using these plants. How are they getting caught? What are they doing? Are they selling it on the street? Are they in ceremony? Or how are they being caught with these psychedelics, right? Like, I know when I was in college, we all did mushrooms, yeah, there was a worry we were going to get caught, but we were doing it, the way that we wanted as college students, right? But for my ancestors were practicing this religion in a ceremonial setting, and they were purposely invaded, their ceremonial instruments destroyed in front of them, these instruments belonging to their ancestors, ceremonial altars completely being destroyed. I think that we've forgotten to recognize the history of what Indigenous people, particularly the Indigenous people of the United States. I think that many people have forgotten, or maybe even don't even understand, that Native Americans, as Native American people, we really don't have religious freedom. I mean, I may have the rights as an Indigenous person who lives on the reservation to have peyote and have a peyote ceremony on my reservation in Idaho. But if I were to leave my reservation and practice my ceremonial in my traditional lands and traditional homelands, I'm essentially violating the law. And so having all of these laws and restrictions upon Indigenous people, that wasn't done by Indigenous people. That was done by you guys. That was done by your ancestors. not my ancestors.
Can I jump and say something here?
Yes, very quick one, please, because time.
Well, it's a little bit like saying, like nobody owns the land. The land belongs to everybody. Sure, on a metaphysical level, it's true. The land belongs to everybody. But that argument is used, Mike, to discredit indigenous rights. So it's a little bit that all lives matter versus Black Lives Matter. Black lives matter. All lives matter. Yeah, genius. Of course, all lives matter. But there are some lives that have been systematically attacked and persecuted and undermined and beaten up. And so we have to stand by those lives before. It doesn't mean that the other lives don't matter. So when you're saying that, about peyote, indigenous people have special rights. It's because they are minorities that have been marginalized, persecuted, colonized, their land stolen, and it's a scarce resource. And that's a priority, and there's historical legacies. So that speaks to that heritage, to that history of extinction, genocide, and to very hard fought battles that have a history. So you can't just like rewrite, on a cartoon that is in another level. But I also want to say that there is a kind of really schizophrenic element. On the one side, you want to say indigenous people, they learn about these medicines, they use this for millennia, they know so much, and they are the guardians and the stewards. And therefore, psychedelics are good and legitimate and have been used by humankind since ever. On the other hand, we don't want to talk to the real indigenous people that exist right now in this moment on planet Earth and ask their opinion. So we want the indigenous legitimacy to say that we're doing something good that has been done forever since the dawn of time, not to play with the words, since the dawn of times, has been done by ever and ever. But when it comes to sitting on the table with indigenous people and hearing them and maybe sucking up to certain values that clash with your own libertarian individualistic values, then you don't want to. And it's really mind-blowing how some people in the psychedelic community have done that and the damage that this has caused. So many of us have worked so many years to make indigenous people feel trust and feel comfortable attending psychedelic conferences, writing in our publications, going in community events. And other people just want to claim this generic, non-indigenous universal rights to peyote. And that has been very harmful to this movement.
Thank you. Thanks for all your great opinions and answers to my questions. I will post now in the chat to everyone a beautiful talk by Stephen Benally at Horizons talking about peyote. I invite everyone to watch this. And quickly jumping to Q&As from the audience. We only have 4 questions so far, so let's see how it goes. Maybe some more will pop up. If not, we have some other things to discuss, because we could like sit here for a whole day and discuss this, I suppose, 4 or 5 of us. First question is from Rosalind Watts. What do you think will happen if Compass Pathways win the psilocybin patents they have applied for?
I think they already did actually get the patent, and it's being challenged right now.
They have won. There's a
But what's going to happen?
So what will happen?
I think what's going to happen is, they just got like their IPO, right? They got like some $1 billion valuation or something crazy. I don't know. I think what's going to happen, and I hope what happens, is that just the bubble just bursts there. And I think it's going to tank personally because of a couple of reasons. Well, one, you've got Usona, that's also taking psilocybin through the process, and Compass is only treatment-resistant depression, whereas Usona is going to be major depression. So the Usona approved is presumably when that happens. Psilocybin would be much wider in scope. Also, there's the decrim movement is growing. And so not only this decrim nature thing, but also, you look at Oregon, that just decriminalized all drugs, and also created psilocybin services, right? So like if you look at to what's happening in Oregon as maybe foreshadowing what could spread to other parts of the country, there's going to be a lot more people that are going to be growing their own mushrooms. And so I think, hopefully the whole compass thing becomes moot. But what's going to happen in the short term probably is compass will probably be first. They'll probably get FDA approval before USONA. What's probably going to happen is the FDA will approve Comp 360, their patented blend of psilocybin, approve that, change it to a different schedule, while keeping any other psilocybin as a Schedule 1 substance. So there will be a period of time probably where on the federal level, Compass psilocybin is the exclusive, and Compass is probably going to see to it, right, that other psilocybin forms that are not theirs remain Schedule 1 substances on a federal basis, which is obviously problematic for so many reasons. Like the only way you're allowed to have access to psilocybin, even though there's no reason to believe that the Comp 360 psilocybin is somehow any better for you than any other psilocybin, but there's already precedent for this in the US at least. But yeah, that'll be the only valid way to get psilocybin for a minute. But however, if the states like Oregon, et cetera, are moving their own laws, in the federal designation might not matter, kind of like with cannabis, right? Cannabis is still a Schedule 1 substance federally, but of course, cannabis is legal and sold all around, including here in California. I can go to a store right now and go buy weed.
You're making UK listeners very jealous right now.
Yeah, I can go down the street and buy weed in a store right now, even though it's a federal Schedule 1 substance. So there's weird contradictions like that. But that's probably what's going to happen. I think they're going to have a federal monopoly for some period of time in what I would call an invalid way. But I think it's ultimately going to be kind of moot because we're going to have access to mushrooms more broadly. And hopefully they just tank.
Thanks, Mike.
Sorry, going on, yeah.
Yeah, go on.
No, just to play with that idea, that scenario that Mike laid out, like the strategy would probably be in that situation to aggressively market during that monopoly period to establish it so that it, for their perspective, they create a foothold during that time. And whatever indication or area that they have some in with, the strategy and the pressure would be on grabbing that area. And so again, we go back to that point of what does aggressive marketing look like? And it's very different in the US and the UK because we don't have healthcare advertising. Those ads with the very quick kind of list at the end of all the horrific side effects. It's a very different situation in the UK and Europe. But I would imagine in the US that there would be a lot of money spent on PR and advertising. And the PR would be around delegitimizing other approaches, delegitimizing do-it-yourself approaches, delegitimizing anything that's around the underground, and that could take really nefarious forms we're not yet aware of. I mean, just look at the post-truth dystopia we already live in, and what you can do with micro-targeting. So I think
sorry, I want to add to that, but if you're
go for it. No, go for it. Yeah.
Oh, I can already see it. What's going to happen, right? Compass is very likely going to make this case that's like, oh, you really shouldn't be using these wild mushrooms that grow in the ground because you don't know what the composition is and it could be anything. And, the only safe way to do psilocybin is if you know the precise dosage, like in Comp 360. And if you know the precise dosage and you have it with a trusted doctor, this is the only safe way. Don't go and take that crazy risk of doing those mushrooms with unknown amounts of psilocybin that grow in the ground with someone who's not a doctor. And it's going to be something to that effect.
Probably we might see more stories in the media about, problems in the underground as well, I believe, because they happen all the time, but currently we don't see that much of them because it's not convenient to publish horror stories right now, but then it probably we will. So anything to add, Don or Bia, before we move on to the next question? Cool. I'm going to move to the next one from John. What do you think are the best ways individuals could support a more thoughtful development of psychedelic culture that are specific to us, the UK, but to remain well grounded in a global context?
I think that's for Alex.
Yeah, that's an Alex question.
I was just thinking, no one else lives in the UK, and I am half Northern Irish, so I guess I am half from the UK, but I'm also sort of a visitor here, being half German as well. But being authentic to the UK, I mean, so I'm just going to reread the question, John, as well. Could support a more thoughtful development of psychedelic culture that is specific to the UK, remain well grounded in the global context. I mean, specific to the UK for me implies that we deepen the psychedelic community within the UK, so that instead of being various disparate parts, we kind of come together. And in a way, that's what we do at Breaking Convention every couple of years, and that the Psychedelic Society does every couple of days, probably. And so, but it's quite important that we establish what is a UK psychedelic culture. And I think it is there, and I think it's kind of forming, and I think we could all come together in new ways to kind of solidify that. I think, like in the US, we should have our own version of something like the North Star Pledge, and work with them as well, so that we have a kind of alignment globally. So if we're a pod, and then of course there's Europe as well, there's stuff happening in Germany right now, and then for it to be global, I'm not really sure, really, but I think the first step is to establish what it means in the UK to really come together, and that probably applies to any place in the world, I'd say.
Yes, thank you. And also, just a quick note, we will soon host 2 panels about drug policy and decriminalisation, and that will be in January. We'll invite people from States and from UK, and we'll look at UK a bit more. Today was quite US centric, but a lot is happening there. So therefore my guests. Next question is, don't you think there's a balance to find between keeping it for those who already know it and creating the next big startup of psychedelics? I heard a lot of sick people and doctors calling for a controlled therapeutic use, including supportive setting and trained guides.
Well, you definitely want to create that access. I don't think any of us here are against creating the access to it. It's just the pushing of it, right? And it's the exclusivity of that container that's the problem. It's the saying that, like, this is the only valid way to do it is in this particular setting.
Anything to add? No. Okay, next one. The Oregon 109 treatment model is rolling out in 2023. How do you feel about that approach?
I think it's really interesting. We don't know what it's going to be yet, is part of the thing, right? It's going to be like a 2-year period as they're developing that. But I think it's a very, there's a lot of promise there, because what's compelling to me about Oregon 109 is it's a lot more expansive than anything that's going to come through the FDA, right? So it won't require a medical condition, as my understanding is. It'll be available for a wider array of people who just want to do psilocybin for deeper purposes, for spiritual purposes, for whatever purpose, right? And also, it's not going to be more expensive in terms of who can be a provider. You won't need to have a doctor. I think you just need a high school diploma. I'm assuming there's going to be some other sort of requirements as well that qualify someone to be a guide or not, but it is going to lay the groundwork for potentially much more expansive models for providing psilocybin than what we're going to get through the FDA process. And I think what's also important here is that in Oregon, Measure 110 also passed. So you also can use decriminalize as all drugs, right, including mushrooms. So in Oregon, it will not be the case that you can only get mushrooms or psilocybin through this particular regulated container, but you actually will be able to have your own mushrooms. Now, there is a gap in Oregon between Measure 109 and 110 that I think is important to name. The way Measure 110 is phrased is that it decriminalizes up to 12 grams of any psilocybin containing substance, which I think the case could be made that it doesn't go far enough to protect people growing their own mushrooms, because the substrate that you would grow your mushrooms in is on the order of magnitude of pounds, right? So the argument could be made that it's not protecting enough people who are growing mushrooms. Realistically, I think it'd be hard pressed in Oregon that they're going to go after people for growing mushrooms after they just passed both of these measures. Probably not going to be searching for people growing mushrooms in their homes, but it would be nice to see Oregon pass an additional piece of legislation that more explicitly protects the right to grow your own mushrooms. And I would say in that scenario, if you have the right to grow your own and possess your own and do kind of whatever you want in your own space, and there's also this access to a container for that has a structure that is more expensive than the FDA structure, well, that seems to me to be very promising. We'll see how it shakes out. But to me, I'm very excited to see what might happen.
Thanks, Mike. Anything to add?
I just think, no, I feel that perhaps we have beaten up too much this idea of mainstreaming, and somebody was calling for a more like mediated solution. I think we did a bit of straw man, like to really criticize and like amplify negative aspects. I don't think that, all growth or all expansion is necessarily evil. I just think it would be good to have a reminder that there are mixed models that might be working. And I think there's space for experimentation and also for alternative models. I also think that nonprofit versus for profit is a kind of reductionistic opposition. There's many other models in between. There's public benefit corporation, and then there's just other, many possibilities to think of alternatives. There are some companies that have been thinking of alternative models to give back to the psychedelic community, to certain specific populations, to certain causes. I think we also have to build a kind of more hopeful end. We're talking a lot about all the negative aspects, but this is happening, and this is the new reality. I think we felt compelled to say those things because we all feel crushed that they're not being said enough. And also some parts of our movement that are doing this job, sometimes they do it in ways that are not helpful and are not productive, and have also, created a lot of aggression and unethical tactics and methods that also are not helpful. So I think a lot of us can benefit from a more balanced, nuanced conversation, and also just remind that there are people in these companies. Like, for example, I made friends with a person that is in one of these mainstream companies, and she was influenced by my views, and she brought ideas to the company, and they created like a cultural expert that is trying to create new things. I really think we can have space for building things. I am a believer of the North Star Pledge. We launched it in Psychedelic Liberty Summit, and I think, that's calling the attention of big players to ethical values. I do believe in inviting them to our conferences. I do believe in having conversations with these leaders. I do believe that teaching them the values that have guided this community is part of the work that we have to do. I think we have to do harm reduction. And somebody also said, how can we move this, steward this movement in better ways forward? I think it is about creating education, creating communication, not alienating people, creating forums like this, creating public access to good information. We're coming towards an end. And I think that more than going by one-on-one question, if you agree, I think it would be good to just sort of wrap it up with a kind of general message. I know that people have the questions, but I just wanted to say this kind of more standing backwards. And also, I just want to make a plea for philanthropists that want to invest and to help, that they also think of business, not as business as usual, but also think of, like, we're talking about psychedelic models for new businesses, psychedelic thinking, new thinking for businesses, but also I would think new models for philanthropy, because philanthropy is frequently rooted in very colonial and hierarchical and old structures. And I also urge philanthropists to talk more to the community, to decide more, to ask people where they need help and how they can help. We're working on a project on indigenous reciprocity in Chacruna. I want to invite everybody to visit our site and also learn about our conference, Sacred Plants in the Americas. And I want to say one final thing on my end, that what breaks my heart is to see a lot of really trashy new psychedelic publications. So there is something that I learned that is like companies create content as brand advertising. And so it is each time harder to distinguish what is news to what is propaganda and marketing. So you create a blog post, you create an interview, you create a story, but in fact is a branch of your marketing department to promote your company. You create a podcast, but that is a service of selling your product. So I urge consumers to pay attention to what they're reading, because we're seeing more and more content, information, podcasts, events, conferences that are supposed to create education, but are just branches of these new companies. So I think we need to be alert on those fronts.
So are they just there to sell further products? I've seen that a lot. I know I wanted to actually ask for final thoughts, Bia. You were quicker than me, but there is one more question from the audience. This is the last one. I think it's an important one because it's a bit of a clarification. So I want to quickly ask it before I ask everyone else for the final thoughts. So question is, so to clarify, are the panelists for or against the criminalization of mushrooms and ayahuasca? It seems that decriminalisation will inevitably lead to exploitation under capitalism.
I am for.
I'm for ending the drug war entirely and recognizing indigenous stewardship of medicines.
Don and Alex? Don?
Let Don go first.
Thanks, Alex. I don't want to necessarily answer that question with a yes or no, because I have been advocating that a lot of the psychedelic plants that are up for decriminalization are attached to indigenous communities and indigenous cultures. And so I'm wondering if these organizations who are looking at decriminalization, if they've reached out to these indigenous communities and organizations, or indigenous communities and cultures, because I think as Westerners in the United States, I think that we are so arrogant that we can go ahead and decriminalize plants that don't even grow in our own country. And so I think it's important that these communities are considered. What do they think about decriminalization of these plants?
So just to be clear, the question was about peyote. It was about mushrooms and ayahuasca.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel a similar discomfort with the question that maybe Dawn was expressing. I mean, overall, my answer would be yes, but with a caveat, because like if you ask me the question, should people be allowed to drink alcohol? I'd be like, yeah, but not if they're 6 years old. And I'm not talking right now about 6-year-olds taking mushrooms. I'm talking about our society's maturity overall in order to be able to use these substances well and properly. And so while my overall answer is yes, it does come with a kind of caveat of like, we desperately need to evolve our culture and our frameworks to be able to hold these medicines. Because if we don't, then we would be one of the first societies to just let anybody take them willy-nilly. And we've seen what happens with that, especially in our society. And very few indigenous cultures just do that. There's a certain respect and a reverence and a process one goes through. So it's not an easy question to answer, but a conditional yes would be my answer.
I also think too, I just want to add something really quick, that just because it's the law, just because that it's the policy, regulation, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't mean that it's right. I mean, all of these plants, when it comes to ownership, the term ownership alone is a colonized term. And so when you think about, people saying that indigenous people are claiming ownership of that, that's a completely Western and colonized term, because peyote has its own right. Just like all of these other plants, they also have their own right. What about their rights? Let's look at the plant's rights.
Thank you. I agree. And thanks, Bia, for your comment. I agree. We definitely need education, more of those discussions within the community. And I'm very curious to hear last thoughts. We reached the time, but I hope we have just like a couple of minutes for a short summary of maybe your hopes or anything else that you want to share to end this beautiful discussion.
I'd like to add on to things Bia was saying a moment ago, which is that, yeah, I don't think this is about like for-profit's good and non-profit's good and for-profit's bad. It's not about that at all. You can be ethical. You can be an ethical for-profit company. You can be an unethical nonprofit, and there's the examples of both exist. But it's something a little bit deeper than that. But you know, what we can talk about though is what's the primary intention. If the primary intention of the company is profit, happening to, I'm a serial entrepreneur and I'm just trying to make profits, and this is the next thing I'm doing, or is your primary intention to serve and you're using, but a healthy organization, of course, profit or nonprofit, needs a cash flow, needs to have that energy going through it for it to survive. So it's kind of about, again, it's the dog wagging the tail, or it's the tail wagging the dog. And yeah, like Bia, I also have friends that work in all these. I have friends affiliated with Compass and with Field Trip and all these groups. And I don't think that necessarily the people running these organizations are bad, and that's not what I'm saying. I think a lot of them actually do have good intentions, and they are actually trying to heal. And I think they have a lot of severe blind spots. And so I think that my ask would be, dig a little bit deeper. Keep doing your work. Don't just do business as usual, because business as usual is what's so destructive. So it's actually like we need to rethink like some baseline assumptions about economic models entirely. And actually, so I will be, for psychedelic seminars, I'm presently working on an event series on psychedelic economics that will have Charles Eisenstein and other folks. I'm building it. It's not announced yet, but this will be coming early 2021. I'll link here to my site. So
we will definitely share it anyway. So follow
Great.
Society's Facebook. We share all the important panels that Mike hosts, and Chakruna as well.
Thank you. Yeah, so stay tuned for that. We'll go into a lot of nuance in that series of events about both the issues of the current model, as well as there are a lot of new models being tried, steward ownership models, pollination approaches. There's all kinds of interesting things that, and teal organizations. I think UK Psychedelic Society is set up as a teal organization. So yes. There's stuff happening. And I think that's what there are models that are better, and we need to start really looking at that.
I agree. We are a co-op. We don't have shares. We are purpose-driven organization, and it is possible, and it's very rewarding actually. Thanks, Mike. Can I ask anyone, Dawn or Alex? Dawn, can you share your final thoughts with us?
Yeah, I think that one of the takeaways that I'd like to share is that I think it's important for people to, as Mike said, to continue educating yourself. And for me, it's, educating yourself on what appropriation is when it comes to psychedelic use, because appropriation, that's a colonized term, and it's attached to ecocide, it's attached to colonization, commercialization, all of those things. And so I think, just continuing to educate yourself on what those terms mean, but also on the history of a lot of these psychedelic plants. Who are the users? Who are the communities behind these plants? What is the biology of these plants? What does it take for a plant to grow before it's harvestable? What are the tribal laws or the indigenous laws that are behind these plants? I think it's very important that people continue to educate themselves on what these plants, but for themselves, are about.
Thank you. Agreed.
Yeah. Yeah. Firstly, really grateful to have been part of this and just listening to everyone. I can feel my own ideas shifting even a little bit as we're ending this, and I'm really appreciative of Bia raising the point of the kind of I can really own in myself a kind of moral rectitude and certainty that comes up when I feel like the medicines that I hold sacred are under attack in some way. And so I can very easily myself go to a kind of either or black and white mindset. And I think it was good to hear Bia mention this. It's more of a both and, it's like there's not one single way, and there's many different, like a mycelial network, there's many different strands that can happen at the same time. And that's, I think, a really important thing to remember. And then something that came up for me when Dawn was speaking as well is humility. Feels really important, because with all the kind of big fireworks of like IPOs and psychedelic conferences and this and that, and everyone's getting on board, what is lost is humility. And that is the absolute, for me, key to this, to an honorable and proper relationship with the psychedelic medicine and with the psychedelic experience. So if we can all embody humility, everyone who's in the space, and use that as one of probably many values, that feels like a good starting point for the position we find ourselves in right now.
Anya, can I give final thought?
Sure, my dear.
No, I want to bring back to, again, something Dawn said about the rights of the plants. And I just want to remind of how, arrogant this drug war is, but like this idea that that there are some plants that are evil and that we should exterminate them. I'm thinking about things like, sending like products over coca plantations in the Amazon, and our view that some plants are just, they shouldn't exist. And we as humans have rights to eliminate them, to forbid them, to get rid of them. So the drug war is anthropocentric and is a species-centric. Is a war against fellow species that we consider ourselves to have more rights than them. And I want to bring back to Black Lives Matter, and I want to bring back to this, indigenous people don't own anything and everything belongs to nature. And I would like to remind again that the psychedelic community can be incredibly alienated and arrogant to traditional people and to certain, to race, to territory, to ethnicity. So there's so much spiritual bypassing, and this idea that we'll take psychedelics and that we'll see that in a spiritual level, we're all one and we're all together, and race and racism is just something problematic and shallow. And this is not helpful, people. Like, that's really not helping to change, racial relations. If you talk to minorities, they always understand when you talk about race, when you talk about special rights, when you talk about marginalization. This idea of wholeness is not that we are all alike and that there is no difference. Minorities understand, because they are discriminated, that it's not like that. So we're trying to create an educational, we wrote an article about when all the psychedelic communities, a lot of them published statements in solidarity of Black Lives Matter. And there was so much hatred on social media. Why are you talking about supporting Black Lives Matter, all lives matter? Psychedelics are not about this. Psychedelics are not about politics, the cult of intersectionality. Oh, you are Marxists, you're toxic, social justice people, you want to invade the space of psychedelics. And psychedelics, you take all psychedelics and we're all one and everything is alike and everybody's alike, and that doesn't exist. That is racism. And that is denying, that certain populations have been stigmatized and persecuted. In Brazil, we had just recently our George Floyd case, this man that was incredibly beaten up last Friday. And our president said that there is no racism in Brazil, that Brazilians are imitating the United States. It's absurd. So I think talking about mainstreaming and, this lack of race awareness come hand in hand with mainstreaming. And I think it's up to us to do the hard work of teaching ourselves, starting to look at our own privilege and our own bias. And yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Can I add a comment to that?
Yes, while you do that, I'm just going to make a quick announcement. I'm posting a YouTube link to a beautiful talk we had. It's a free video to watch about decolonizing minds. And this is what it's about what Bia was just talking about. And go on, Mike, and we have to like end after this. Last one.
I added a link as well to the series I did on racial justice, and also this bypassing, right? This idea, oh, we're all one, and race is a construct. Yes, that's a spiritual bypass, right? Because yes, while race is a construct, it has real effects on us, and we're not going to get past that to this unity thing that we're experiencing without acknowledging it. We have to actually, another way of putting it is the only way out is through. So the more we deny it as it's there, the more it's just we have to look at it straight on, and we have to go through it in order to get to that, unity. And that same thing goes for to bring it to this whole talk, the shadow of mainstreaming. Like we bring this up here, all these points, because we have to acknowledge them. The only way out is through. We have to acknowledge the shadow in order to move through it. So I'll leave on that note.
I agree 100%. And this is what came out from our Decolonize Your Mind talk as well. So I invite everyone to listen. So this is us. We'll be ending now. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for bringing your super important voice. I've been wanting to organize this panel for a few months. I'm really happy. I'm so happy it finally happened. And you are some of my favorite people in this field, and it's such an honor to have you all together here for this discussion. I invite everyone to keep following our series, and we will be hosting more awesome people and more important discussions, and we will not be quiet. That's what I say. So have a wonderful night, everyone, or day for the folks in different continents. That's it.
Thank you, Anya.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Anya. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Okay, so bye.